This episode of Why Did I Become a Doctor is brought to you in partnership with Medical Brief, South Africa's leading daily healthcare news service. Stay informed with trusted reporting, expert insights, and analysis that matters to healthcare professionals. Subscribe free at medicalbrief.co.za/subscribe. I read them myself every week diligently, and you should subscribe if you've not. Gonna do it right now. Cheers. Mr. Daniel Kapelus, son of David, who's the son of Manly.
Yep.
You come from a long line of legendary lawyers, Daniel.
Yeah. Very, very legal family. So
Why didn't you become a lawyer?
I think when you are exposed to something from a very young age, it either makes you insanely passionate or it puts you off immediately. And my dad is, as you say, he's an attorney. My mom is an advocate. So all the small talk around the table for my whole childhood was always legal stuff. And I just realized pretty quickly, I couldn't do this, man. I saw the size of the files that they bring home and have to read in a night or whatever. Not for me.
Did you ever even pitch it to them? Like, yeah, I'm thinking of it, or not?
Every now and then, if I want to, because I ended up going into science. So if I ever want to kind of get to my parents a little bit, I'll tell them I'm going to go do patent law.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to still go do an LLB.
That's funny, because didn't you want to do that? Yeah, I thought I was going to do patent law after I left dentistry. No, and I'll tell you why I asked the thing about pitching it to your parents, because I pitched it to my dad when I was in matric, standard 9 matric.
Yeah.
And he's also an attorney. Probably just as long, or maybe even longer than your dad has been, because my dad's 78 at the moment. And he said to me, don't do it. So
yeah, I think my parents both were pretty, obviously we spoke about it a bit, and they were both pretty unanimous in they don't think I would be a good attorney, and I don't think I would be a good attorney because I think it requires a very specific personality type to be able to collate, all of that evidence together, but also keep track of so many open cases and, be very formulaic. But what I think I would be good at, and what my parents do agree with, is that I would probably be good at being an advocate and being, an orator and arguing and that kind of thing, which I'm much more inclined to do. And I did a lot of debating and that kind of stuff at school and public speaking. And if I had to, I would definitely be keen on being an advocate.
Yeah, you can immerse yourself in one or two matters and know everything, the in and out of it. Your parents didn't want you to do.
No, they discouraged me pretty actively.
From the law thing.
Yeah, but I think that there's this like human phenomenon where we benchmark intelligence based on characteristics that we don't have. So like, for example, I'm not musical or artistic at all. So when I see someone who can play grade 8 piano and, have a picture in their mind and then draw it, I'm like, wow, that person is incredible. So my parents weren't, and I don't think they'll mind me saying this publicly, they weren't great at maths and science. So when they saw that as a child I was good at maths and science, they were like, wow, this kid is so much cleverer, and they really pushed me to harness that. So they discouraged me from doing anything that was more, I suppose, humanities facing, just purely because of the maths and science ability.
Well, I'll say it. They probably were thinking, don't waste your brain on law, right? You've got a good brain, don't waste it. I deliberately called you Mr. Daniel Kapelus, but in a few months' time, you're going to be Dr. Daniel Kapelus, right?
Yes, hopefully. I'm right at the tail end of my PhD in vaccinology.
Yeah. So, can I call you a vaccinologist? Is that what?
Yes, yeah,
right?
that is what I am.
And you're the expert in vaccines, so.
Yeah, so vaccinology is a really cool field because all of the sort of constituent parts of vaccinology have existed for a really long time, and we've had vaccines for a really long time. So if you look at vaccinology, you've got the virology and microbiology of the actual pathogen, and then you've got the immunology of how it all works, and you've got the production side and the regulatory side, and there are so many things. And then relatively recently, the idea came to sort of how can we create an umbrella that all of these things will fall under with a vaccine focus. So we create these vaccinologists who then get exposure to that whole pipeline, and then you then sort of niche yourself into a specialty. So in my master's degree in vaccinology, I got exposure to all of that stuff, from vaccine design and discovery through to production, testing, regulatory stuff, all the immunology, all the microbiology, etc. But also with the opportunity to sort of say, well, what part of it do you really love? And I really love the immunology of it. So my PhD is in the immunology around vaccines.
Okay.
So I specialize in sort of long-term vaccine response, looking at if we tinker with the doses and the timing of doses and whatever, could we be eliciting longer lasting protection, and could we be using what we've got better while we wait for new vaccines to be made?
So if I see something on like TikTok or Instagram where some doctor or whoever, medical doctor or even whatever, is talking about vaccines and saying this or that, and if I'm not sure, could I come to you and say, "Hey, Daniel, I mean, does this check out?"
Yeah.
Would you be able to like talk some
Yeah.
sense into me or tell me if it's right or wrong? Or because you never know who to go to, right? I mean,
Yeah,
especially with social media, people are very convincing.
for sure. For sure. And it's very easy to talk a good game.
Yeah.
And there's this like societal phenomenon now where people just don't like to admit they don't know something.
Yes.
And I think the hallmark of a good scientist, especially, is that we're very prepared to say we don't know something, because science isn't about certainty. It's about, the highest likelihood that this is how things work.
You're not helping your case. No, you put it nicely. But I'll put it even differently. You said there's a societal thing about not being able to say I don't know.
Yeah.
That's one of my pet peeves about lawyers. Like you'll never hear a lawyer saying I don't know.
Yeah.
I've spoken to many. They'll default to it depends,
Yes.
or they'll redirect the conversation to something that they know about, and then you'll just be sitting there nodding and be like, oh, okay, yeah, they must know what they're talking about.
Exactly.
But if I can ask, like, would that, like what he's saying about the likelihood of the possibility of the correctness, but then aren't we just arguing with someone else who could be a little bit more correct or less correct,
So
up until the science proves otherwise?
yeah, absolutely. So before I answer that, and it's a great question because it's something that I love discussing. But I mean, if you see something online that's about vaccines, then I'm in a good position to be able to answer it. And if I can't, I will say to you, I'm not really sure on this, or this isn't my area of specialty. I can check up on it for you, or I can refer you to someone who might know better. But with my training and with the exposure I've had to general vaccinology as well as my specializations, if it's vaccine related, there's a good chance that I'm in a good position to answer it. But when it comes to that scientific process, I think the difference between good science and like conspiracy theorists or that kind of thing is good scientists will never speak in absolutes, right? So when you formulate a hypothesis about how something works, and then you set up an experiment to test it. And it's better to think about it as like a falsification attempt rather than a proving attempt. So then you test what you think is happening, and you rigorously look for statistical proof that it's not really the case, potentially. So when you set your significance level for your stats and that kind of thing, what you're saying is, like, if I'm testing two different vaccines and I want to see if one produces a better antibody level than the other, I'm looking for a difference in the antibody levels. And then if I look at my data and I've set my significance at 5%, and I see that there is genuinely a difference, that is saying that I would only see this in the data 5% of the time or less if there wasn't really a difference. And then what we do with science over time is we accumulate evidence that converges on what is pointing towards the most likely outcome that's happening. And that's why science is so strong, is because we don't just say this is the truth. We say this is what our current consensus on all the evidence is pointing to, and we invite you to falsify it, and we invite you to stress test it. And that's why even if it's your own theorem that gets disproven, when science evolves and changes, it's the most amazing thing, because it means we're getting more evidence to converge on a closer consensus to what is actually the truth. But we can't ever say with absolute certainty that this is the truth, if that makes sense.
So I mean, I've had a dig at the lawyers, but I must also mention that similarly, I mean, I've consulted with a number of doctors and clinicians over the years, and there's only a handful of cases where a clinician has told me, look, I need to read up on this, or I need to consult with a senior colleague and come back to you. I wonder if there's probably some pressure on the clinician who's patient-facing to not come across as, I don't know what's going on here, and then put in their mind thinking the patient's not going to trust me because I'm saying I don't know, right? That's the one thing. But then my gripe with scientists, because I think scientists are brilliant. Engineers and scientists always have this there's this debate we have in my family, because my family has a lot of healthcare workers in them.
Yeah.
And I always tell them, you guys think you're all very clever doctors and everything, but the sharpest among us are the engineers. That's my perception, having also consulted with engineers in my capacity as a lawyer, right? But my gripe with engineers and scientists and all those like really analytical, super boffin types is that they're not good at storytelling.
Yes.
And storytelling is what gets people informed or misinformed.
Absolutely.
The PR of the profession.
Exactly. And that's actually the biggest gripe that I also have with my peers. And COVID really exposed this, because if you are privileged enough to have access to this really niche technical information that just not a lot of people have the opportunity to learn, I feel that part of the responsibility of holding that knowledge, especially when it is something that has as big a public interest as vaccinology, part of your responsibility is to try and communicate it and make it more accessible. And you get a lot of people, especially with something as scary as COVID, where a lot of people just don't understand what's going on. There's this scary new virus going around. We've produced a vaccine in, a way less time than we've been told it usually takes. Like, people don't understand why we managed to do it so fast. They think maybe their corners cut, et cetera, where it was a really rigorous process. But most of the time, I found that when you just sit down and you engage with someone and you communicate effectively and you're storytelling and you're listening, that's when you win people over and show them how things really work. My colleagues who would listen to someone say, I'm a little hesitant about the COVID vaccine, and they would just be like, don't be silly,
Yeah.
that dismissive attitude and lack of communication pushes people away from the science and pushes people away from what we want to achieve in public health. So I agree with you completely that storytelling aspect and communication is so vital to actually making us have the impact that we want to have.
I mean, the point about dismissive colleagues and stuff, I see that a lot in clinical practice where, and you'll know this, Yak, we always have this joke. They say, don't come here with your Dr. Google stuff, right? We dismiss the patient.
Yeah.
Because they've researched it, to the best of their ability, right?
Yeah.
But as you say, that doesn't help, because you're dismissing them, but you're not correcting them, right? That's the first thing. And the second thing is that I feel like people, they go online. They're not going online looking to be misinformed or misled. They're looking for all the information that's accessible to them, and they're deciding, okay, I'm going to trust this because that guy, he speaks with conviction and he looks like he's intelligent and he wears glasses and whatever it is, right? Whereas the scientist is not connecting with me. They're just telling me, no, do this and do that because we know better. We're the scientists.
Yeah.
We're the experts.
There's a whole, like the psychology behind effective communication is really fascinating. And I went on a whole rabbit hole during COVID because I try to do a lot of public facing stuff to try and put good information out. And I wanted to really learn how to communicate effectively with different kinds of people, so I would do podcasts or that kind of thing, or I would just go to my friends of mine who were restaurant managers or whatever would ask me to come and speak to their staff. And so I had the opportunity to speak to a very wide range of people about the same topic. And it gave me a lot of exposure into what are the common threads that you can use to communicate with people. And that was really interesting. But one of the things that I noticed with people who were trying to push a different narrative, should I say? I want to be diplomatic about this. The usage of sort of false logic and logical fallacies and certain things where you put in just enough information that people know is correct, that you hook them, and then you can start slipping in some stuff. And but also there are a lot of these set logical fallacies that people use. For example, the appeal to nature, where people say, well, anything that's natural is better than anything synthetic. And then they talk about chemicals. And you're like, cool, but everything is a chemical. I saw this interview where this guy goes around to people and it's like, how do you feel about the fact that there's dihydrogen monoxide in our water supply? And they're like, this is terrible. The company needs to do something about it. And it's like, cool. So we should remove the water from the water supply.
Yeah.
And if you list the chemical structure of an apple, you can make that scary. But then you can also say, well, okay, puff adder venom is natural. So
Yeah.
Is it good for you? But what I find really interesting when it comes to the communication stuff is how people really weave in these logical sort of fallacies really intelligently to make their narrative win.
Manipulation, right?
Yeah, it's so interesting. And I think one of the challenges is when you're trying to communicate like scientific evidence, we always want to do it in the most objective way possible. So we try and use the most like level, bland language. We try and use the most neutral tone. We try and make it like unemotional. So when you have someone who is a lay person and they're watching a debate between a scientist and a non-scientist or anti-scientist, for example, the difference in like that emotional level of delivery or whatever, or like someone will bombard a scientist with 20 questions, but one question can take 5 minutes to answer. So then people walk away thinking, okay, well, they only answered one of the 20 questions. They didn't know the other answers of, that kind of thing. So it is a fascinating thing to deal with. How do we make science more accessible to people?
So what Yash was saying earlier on, I don't know if you've seen this meme, don't confuse your Google search with my medical or dental degree.
Yeah.
So sometimes I tell my patients, don't confuse your Google search with my Google search intentionally, but it's probably not the best way to deal with that sort of stuff. But just to head back, you said your specific focus is immunology, all right? Am I correct in assuming that is basically sort of an acquired process within the human body intrinsically to be more preventative so that vaccinology is not needed or vaccines aren't needed?
So
you need to dumb it down for us.
Okay, so there are two primary wings of the human immune system, right? You've got innate immunity, which is not pathogen specific, and it's your body's first line of defenses, and it's a broad response to whenever your body detects that there is something that is not you inside of you, it will unleash the innate immune system. And then the subsequent process is the adaptive immune system, and that is this whole pathogen-specific, memory-associated,
otherwise known as
acquired immunity. Okay. Exactly, right. So with vaccines, what we're doing is we're trying to give you that acquired immunity and that immune memory and train your body so that if it ever does recognize or encounter that pathogen in the wild, it knows what to do really, really quickly, and hopefully it can prevent you from getting sick at all. But what we really want to do, what the first line of importance with vaccines is to try and prevent you getting seriously ill. So that, like the COVID vaccines, for example, were not good at preventing infection, but they were very good at preventing severe disease. Okay. The point about it getting to a point where vaccines are no longer necessary only becomes a reality when we have eradicated a disease. So there are 3 layers to it. You get diseases that are endemic and like they're uncontrolled. They're like raging through your population. The first layer is to control that disease. So it's still going around, but you've got the impact of it under control. The second layer is elimination. So that means in a certain geographical region, you have eliminated transmission of that disease. So you're no longer encountering it. And then eradication is it no longer occurs on planet Earth. So smallpox is the only disease that we've ever eradicated, which is why we no longer have smallpox vaccines, because there's literally no chance that you can ever encounter smallpox again.
So smallpox is the only disease that has gone through those 3 stages of the process that you just mentioned.
Exactly, yeah.
But if I can ask, how do we know that? What if we don't know what the origins of smallpox are, or do we?
So what we do, but also viruses are what we call obligate parasites, right? They cannot survive outside of a host. So a bacteria, for example, can be completely self-sufficient. So bacteria can exist in outside of a reservoir, whereas a virus needs to be within a reservoir somewhere in the world for it to keep happening, whether that's humans or animals or that kind of thing.
So that's my point. I mean, what if smallpox crossed the species barrier, and it exists in, I don't know, mice or some form of other.
So I mean, like there are other species of there are other relatives of smallpox, like cowpox and monkeypox, that exist, but we've seen that they have very limited ability to consistently infect humans, that kind of thing. But we have incredibly sophisticated surveillance systems out there. We are constantly looking for what is around us. And when you can go through a number of years not seeing a virus anywhere in the world, and you are actively looking for it, there's a good chance that it's because it's no longer there.
I'm glad you said good chance, because you're not being absolute. So it's still a possibility.
Look, I mean, we haven't, there has not been an identification of a wild type smallpox virus in nature in over half a century. So I mean, maybe there's some tiny population. I don't know. We can with confidence say that smallpox has been eradicated from the planet, but until you reach that eradication, you still need to be using the vaccines. Measles is a really good example, right? A lot of countries in the world had eliminated measles, like a lot of countries in the global north, like high-income countries. And they got to a point where they effectively did not have measles in their populations, but measles still exists in the world, and it is also the most infectious disease known to man, right? So measles will exploit any gap in your population immunity that starts dropping. And now we've seen it in the UK, in Canada, in the Netherlands, in all over Europe, North America, countries that have lost their measles elimination status because vaccination rates have dropped and they've reintroduced those susceptibility gaps. So even if you have eliminated a disease, you still need to maintain your high vaccine coverage to make sure that you keep that going.
Daniel, I mean, I want to get into the nitty-gritty of all this stuff later, but I want to take us back a step first. When you were growing up as a little boy, right, did you ever think you were going to be doing this kind of work? Or what did you want to be when you were growing up?
I'm going to tell you, at the beginning of 2019, when I started my honors degree, I had literally never even heard the word vaccinology.
Okay.
I did not know it was a thing. And now, 7 years later, I'm getting a PhD in it, when I was growing up,
where are you from? I mean, what did you do?
So I'm Joburg, born and raised, and I went to Red Hill School all the way from kindergarten through to matric.
Very good school, yeah.
And there were a bunch of my core group of guy friends. All of us had this idea that we wanted to be engineers. All of us.
And Red Hill's co-ed, right?
Yes,
so that's why you mentioned guy friends.
Yeah, we were also we were a bit nerdy. We used to spend our weekends, landing at one guy's house and bringing all our computers and playing.
Oh yeah. Cool. Yeah, what LAN games did you guys play?
Counter-Strike.
Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, all of those classic ones.
Yak used to play LAN games at his university, and he got people kicked out of university, but suspended.
Oh, amazing! Nice.
Yeah, go on.
That's quite an achievement. But so we all were we want to be engineers and we want to make cool stuff and we want to solve cool problems and whatever. And I realized that a lot of school kids have a very romanticized idea of what some professions are, because all of us started engineering degrees. One of us finished it and is still an engineer. And I started biomedical engineering.
What did you think was so fascinating about engineering?
Honestly, you remember Meccano? Those Meccano. It was
those toys.
Yeah.
Well, just explain it for the listeners.
It's almost like mechanical Lego,
right?
And it's you build really cool stuff, and there's motors, and you build functional things, and it is so interesting. And
Sorry, what is that? Is that like an advanced Kinder Joy toy?
It's an advanced
it's like
Lego
advanced
type.
Lego. Yeah,
okay.
It's really fun, and the idea of making stuff seemed really cool to me. I loved tearing things apart and very often not being able to put them, actually I would say always not being able to put them back together, but seeing how things worked was super interesting to me. And I always understood that is what engineers do. They understand how something works, and then they make it better and they build a cool new thing, and that's why we have supercars and smartphones and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to be one of those guys who
they shape the world. They shape the world, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. But I didn't realize how much that that is a very small part of what some engineers do,
Mm.
and that engineering as a discipline is not all about that.
Yeah.
Um,
Don't they all just become consultants and work at these big consulting companies? I don't know what an engineer does,
yeah,
but
I
they
just work for a bank.
clever people.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
maintenance.
But,
Okay, good.
but
And then obviously the folks are cool with this because now you're using your
yeah,
brain.
exactly.
Yeah.
And the other thing is like it's a profession,
Yeah.
you know. And I don't know if, I mean, like with my parents, with them both being lawyers, they, and like coming from professional families, like my grandfather on my mom's side was an engineer, my grandfather on my dad's side was a lawyer, you know.
Yeah.
And I think for a long time the convention was you had to become a thing, like,
Yes.
you know.
And you're from a Jewish family, right?
Yes, yeah.
So what I've noticed interacting with Jewish community is that they're very much similar to the Indian community in that, like, becoming a professional is a thing, right? I don't know if it was like that in your family, but
Yeah, absolutely.
it's like you must become a professional.
It's
Yeah.
an achievement.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know,
That's
it's
what's
really, it's
considered
so
success.
funny. Like my uncle, my dad's younger brother, was the only person in the family who just like followed this completely arbitrary path. He became a social anthropologist, right? And my dad recounts the story of when his brother was 6 years younger than him, and he tells the story of when he was at university and he went off to like start. He did a BA and did anthropology, and then my dad kind of said, "Okay, well, after his BA, I'm sure he'll go and
He'll
get a
come back."
professional degree." And then he said, "No, I'm going to do my master's degree in social anthropology." My dad was like, "Okay, this is a bit weird, but I'm sure after that he'll go and get a job, you know." And he just never joined that like conventional fold. So when I wanted to be an engineer, it kind of fit in that fold and it was all good. And then when I left engineering and I like eventually plucked up the courage to say to my parents, "I really am hating this degree and I don't think I'm good at it."
Oh, is that why you left?
Where
Yeah,
did you do it? But
at Wits, yeah. And I said, and they said, "Well, what do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, I really love biology and I want to do a BSc in biology. I want to do science."
How did you know this?
So part of the biomedical, I mean, I did biology for matric and I loved it.
Yeah.
And part of the biomedical engineering that I did was heavily, you know, introductory sort of medical stuff and very heavy biology stuff. And that's the part of the degree that I excelled in. And then all of the electrical engineering components, I just flunked out of basically. And like, I never had an interest in being an electrical engineer. And I didn't understand that biomedical engineering is just electrical engineering with a medical application, really. So there was a point at which I was sitting in a lecture on like electric and magnetic systems on high voltage power grid lines. And I remember thinking, like, what am I doing here? You know?
And how long did you suffer through this?
So I did first year twice, but that was because I did really well in matric and then was real cocky at first year and thought I could.
You know what they say, right? First year is the best 2 years of your life.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. I had a great. My first year was amazing. My first year, I did some good stuff.
Yeah.
And then I did second year, and then after the second year courses, I said to my parents, I just can't do this.
And how did they react?
I think they could see that I was really unhappy, so they supported me in changing to something that could make me happier and improve my quality of life. But they were initially very nervous about this idea of my entering a degree that doesn't result in a job.
Biomedical engineering.
Yeah. So but then I mean, my BSc was in genetics and physiology.
Okay. Yeah.
So like, you have to then get into honors, and you have to then do a master's or something, because if you just have a BSc, it kind of, you're like, cool, I know some cool stuff. But
did they not tell you just do medicine? Do it, just become a...
My mom was like, that's the next bit. If you don't want to be an engineer, be a doctor.
Yeah.
You know, she really pushed me for it.
So why didn't you do it?
Because I've never felt that pull towards being in a clinical environment. Like, I've always loved biology. I've always loved physiology. I like the idea of medicine, and I like the theory of medicine. But I think that when people talk about it being a calling, I think that is very true. And the best doctors that I've ever been treated by or interacted with in my exposure to as a medical scientist are the doctors who you can see live and breathe for being in that clinical environment. And they love being patient facing, and they love the idea of working with the patient and making that patient better. And, you know, and you can tell when someone is in a clinical role where they would rather be anywhere else. And I felt that, considering that I never felt the pull to that, I would be doing a disservice to myself and my patients if I didn't want to be there. And I was also really scared of going from one degree that I hated to another degree that I hated. Like, part of my changing directions was to find what I loved. And I knew that science was a safe space for that because I knew I would enjoy it at a base level.
But this is a very like mature thought process. How old were you at this time? Like around.
I was 21 when I moved degrees. 21, yeah.
But you gave it good thought, and like you actually applied your mind and said, okay. So then what do you apply for? Once you leave the engineering, what do you apply for?
So I went to the science faculty and I said,
At Wits?
at Wits. And I said, I'd like to change degrees. And they said, what are you changing from? And I said, medical engineering. And they said, did you pass all your first year courses? I said, yeah. Then I said, is it possible to get transfer credits for first year BSc mathematics, physics, and chemistry and biology? And they said, but you've got engineering, physics, and mathematics and chemistry. I was like, yeah. They were like, you can have whatever transfer credits you like.
Oh, that's cool.
So I moved into second year of the BSc in genetics and physiology, and immediately like my marks picked up like 40%, and my enjoyment went up, and I loved that I enjoyed learning again. That was an amazing feeling for me. And then
But did you have a plan? Like, I'm getting into this thing, right?
No, I was like, cool, I'm interested in this right now. My career has been shaped by saying yes to a lot of things that I had no idea where they would lead, and just following curiosity and passion. And I firmly believe if you decide on a career and try and find passion within it, you will almost always fail. But if you follow passion and find a career in it, you will almost always succeed.
This is fascinating because you've got two lawyer parents, right?
Yes.
So surely they would have asked you these questions.
Yes, they did.
Daniel,
we had many
what's
arguments.
the plan? And I don't think I mentioned this, but your dad was my boss at Norton Rose. He's old Danae's Rates, Norton Rose, now Danae's. And I know him. He would have asked you these questions, right? Like, what's the plan? And so how did you answer that? And how do you navigate that? I'm asking this because it's important for people that come from families that are maybe not as liberal or as like supportive or whatever.
No, look, I mean, my parents are extremely proud of me, and they are so supportive of my career, and they so believe in what I do. And, they are my number one supporters. But when I was making this transition from engineering to science, there was a lot of friction about it, and we had pretty explosive arguments about it. And my, you're exactly right. I mean, my dad would say, what is the plan? What are you going to be? How you what's your career? How are you going to earn money? And that sort of. And I kind of say, I don't know, but I'll figure it out. Something will come of this, because the reality is that if you're involved with medical science and biology and applied biology, there will always be something to do. I just didn't know what that was yet. So the first thing I fell in love with was genetics. I was like, cool, I'm going to be a geneticist.
Yeah.
So my honors was in genetics, and then my honors research was looking at the relationship between certain genetic mutations and the responses to rotavirus vaccines.
Okay.
Because there was this documented thing where the rotavirus vaccine product that we were using in a lot of countries in sub-Saharan Africa is the same one that they use in a lot of countries in Europe. And it would have like a 95% efficacy in Denmark, but then like a 65% efficacy in sub-Saharan Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And I became fascinated with how could a vaccine respond differently in different populations? And then I started saying, well, how do vaccines work? And what is a vaccine? And all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, but hold on. You're sucking us away from the front. I want to take us back to this thing of how do you convince David Kapelus to say, okay, I'm going to support you at that time when he asked you all these questions.
Yeah.
But before you answer,
but you know why? Because I want to say, this is the beauty of having white parents. Yeah, they will support. I always have this joke, but white parents will support you with anything. Like, you want to go do arts, go do it.
I don't know if Jewish parents can't.
I was going to say that. I didn't want to go there.
I don't know if I would love Jewish parents and with just generic white parent in that regard. The classic Jewish answer is you can do whatever you like as long as you become a doctor first.
So how did you convince him? So you gave him this whole spiel, and then he said, "Okay, fine, go."
But wait, before you answer that, can I ask you? Was his dad passionate about law?
I don't know. I haven't interviewed him yet.
Yeah, well, you what?
We'll get him on the show, right?
Why
Put
I
in a
become a
word.
lawyer, special
Because
edition.
I can't imagine like you as a young kid that just quit something, trying to convince your dad that you're following your passion and you'll make a career out of your passion.
Kind of a
Because,
hard
like,
sell.
passion
Yeah.
fruit light
Yeah.
tea.
So I think the fact that I had a decent track record with the biology subject in the engineering degree, it was kind of like a little bit of hard evidence that like this is stuff that I can do.
Well, a little bit.
handle.
I mean, you failed first year, but then you mentioned it's the
Well, I
biology
never failed
subject.
biology
Yeah,
in first
you
year.
never- yeah,
I
exactly.
failed engineering, maths, and physics in first year.
I know.
But I think the other thing that strongly coincided with this process was I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child and at like 8 or 9 years old, and it's something that I always struggled with. And at this time, I got a new treating psychiatrist who, at that stage, said, "I think it's really important that we have a discussion with your parents about what ADHD actually is and how ADHD actually works, because everyone associates it with just attention deficit and hyperactivity, but it's a whole executive functioning disorder. You know, you really struggle with prioritizing and scheduling and consistency and, you know, all of these kind of things. So it's a physiological condition. And my parents kind of understood that one of the characteristics with an ADHD person is we fully embody that you can take a horse to water but can't make a drink sort of thing. And like if something doesn't give me dopamine, I cannot and will not do it. You know what I mean? And like as I've gotten older and now I've reached a point of like, and it's taken years to develop this control where now I can push through tasks that I don't enjoy. But at that stage, I really like engineering was giving me no dopamine and I didn't want to do it. And I think the fact that I was so insistent on transferring to the BSc, coupled with my parents' growing understanding of how ADHD worked, coupled with my uncle's unconventional path, you know, and my uncle did an amazing amount of he gave me an amazing amount of support because he understood, you know what I mean, not following this like structured career path and like, you know, it's almost like you get to the edge of a map in a game and it hasn't rendered yet and you're like, you know, just looking into that fog. And he had been there and he had forged a career and he spoke to my dad a lot, I think, about it. And eventually my dad kind of said, you know, like, eventually I had a conversation with him about Manly, about my grandfather, because my grandfather was the senior partner of Denise Rates for a long time. And I mean, he was a formidable person in terms of his, you know, in a professional capacity. And at one point, and you know, my wanting to change degrees, it's not a pleasant thing because you feel like a failure, because you feel like you're failing at what you set out to do. And I said to my dad, do you think Manly would still be proud of me? Because he had passed away by this point. And my dad said to me, Manly wouldn't care if you wanted to become a bricklayer, just as long as you are trying to be the best bricklayer you could ever be. And I said to my dad, I don't know what kind of scientist I want to become, but I will become the best scientist that I can be. And I will find what I'm going to do. And I did.
Oh, I've got goosebumps hearing that story. And thank you for sharing that because it's important context, the whole ADHD thing and how to get, you know, your parents also, they needed to understand their kid, you know?
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So then take us to what happens then next?
Yeah. So then I got this exposure to vaccines in my honors research. So it was still very genetics orientated. It was, you know, all the coursework was genetic stuff, but the application of the research was around vaccine response. And I said to my supervisor, I really want to learn more about vaccines. Like, I want to understand this properly, because that's the other thing with me is, you know, like going back to pulling everything apart as a child. Like, if I'm intrigued by something, I want to understand it to its tiniest nut and bolt. I want to really interrogate it. And this was in 2019. I was doing my honors. And at the same time, Wits had just launched their master's degree, which was a Master of Science in Medicine in Vaccinology. And vaccinology, as I said, as a recognized sort of term, is quite new. And at that point, there were extremely few places in the world where you could become a bona fide vaccinologist.
Yeah.
And Wits started this consortium called ALIVE, which stands for the African Leadership in Vaccinology Expertise. And I always thought it was quite a clever acronym.
Yeah.
A vaccinology consortium was ALIVE.
Yeah.
And they, and my supervisor happened to be part of this consortium. And she said, well, go and do this master's degree. So she put me in touch with the program director, who's an amazing, amazing professor. And she interviewed me, and I got in to start in 2020.
Wow.
And it was completely fortuitous. As I said, at the beginning of that honors year, I had literally never heard the word vaccinology. And it ended up being my true passion in life.
And the biggest buzzword of the year.
You were at a time when now vaccines are a thing.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
You couldn't have planned it, eh?
Absolutely. I mean, it was to say we got thrown in the deep end is an understatement.
Yeah.
But it was incredible to see, starting to go into this career path, to see firsthand just how vital it is to the world.
So tell us about that deep end. What were you swimming against? Or
so we started. The program is a 2-year master's program. First year is coursework. Second year is your research. So we were starting our coursework year in 2020. There were, I think, 7 of us in our class.
January 2020.
Yeah, and then December 2019, the SARS-CoV-2 virus had been detected. There were cases in China. By January, it was pretty recognized that this was now starting to spread. And the 5th of March was when South Africa went into our I think it was the 5th or 20th. It was late. Was it late March?
Somewhere in March, right?
Somewhere in March.
But by Jan, people were still making jokes about
COVID. Yeah. By
Jan,
we in public health circles and medical circles, they were like, okay, cool. There is something going on here. But I think publicly, it wasn't being taken very seriously yet. As far as my experience was, but what started happening was in the coursework we were doing, our lecturers were starting to reference this new thing, and kind of when we were talking about the importance of vaccines, for example, and how do we emerging pathogens and that kind of thing, because especially in tropical areas, emerging diseases is a huge thing. So what better example to use than the currently emerging disease that is, and when it started really accelerating and we went into lockdowns and everything, then the vaccine production went into overdrive. The whole world realized what a significant problem this was, and it was one of the only times I think that we've had the world's resources concentrated on solving the same problem, and it was amazing to see what we could do. But then all resources were stretched thin, so they needed all hands on deck in the clinical trials that we were running, in responses in clinics, that kind of thing. So they very quickly said to us, we're rotating you through clinical trial teams. We're exposing you to real world clinical trials. We are, if you have the ability to volunteer in a clinic and help out, then please do, that sort of thing. So we were getting all the same coursework we would have gotten, but with this super intense, real world exposure to what it was all actually about. And I think that just made it such a powerful experience.
Sure. And what do you do in those trials? And
so at that stage, as students, we rotated through every different part of it. So we had some exposure to the clinical side, the lab side, the data handling side, all that kind of thing. But the clinical trial process is really interesting. So typically, what would happen is when you are not in an emergency situation and you can at leisure develop your vaccine, you would have the idea for your vaccine and kind of start developing it. And then you would have this extensive preclinical testing phase where you do animal models and cell culture models and that kind of thing. And you kind of just want to see if there's any viability to this idea, but I mean, if your animal model fails, then that is definitive. It doesn't work.
Okay.
And then once you get your preclinical data and you say, okay, well, I have enough data to suggest that we could be onto something here, then you would do your phase 1 trial, which is a really small trial, tens of people, and it's mostly in very healthy people, and it's all about safety. It's I don't know what this product does really yet, so I need to give it to healthy people in a super controlled environment. and just make sure that it's safe. It's not like causing anything. And then if it passes that, you then go into your phase 2, which is now a few hundred people, or up to maybe a couple of thousand people in exceptional stances. Your phase 2 is a few hundred. And that's all about, like in a vaccine, it's all about immunogenicity. So that's the ability of a vaccine to elicit an immune response. So I've now looked at, okay, I know it's fundamentally safe. I now need to see, like, does it actually stimulate the immune system the way we want it to? And once we say, okay, it checks those 2 boxes, now we can see about how does it actually work in trying to prevent disease, and what's the long-term effect and that kind of thing. So then you have your phase 3, and that's now thousands of people. And there's always a lens where you're like assessing safety, because if you have a side effect that occurs in 1 in 10 people, you're very likely to see it if you have 50 people in your trial. If you have 1 in 100, then you're very likely to see it if you've got 1,000. But if you now have a 1 in 1,000 chance of something happening, so the bigger you scale, the more chance you have of seeing rarer side effects. There's always a safety lens. But then that phase 3 is all about what's the efficacy of this thing? So like in our group that gets the new vaccine versus the old vaccine, or if there is no old vaccine, then the new vaccine versus a placebo, do kids get the disease less in this group than in that group? Does it work fundamentally? And then it would get licensed.
Right.
So it's this linear process where there are like valleys of death.
And still long, right?
Hugely long, because it's
Are
mostly
you
not
talking like under normal circumstances?
Yeah. So like that's classic vaccine development. And like after each phase, there's a chance that your data shows that this is not a good vaccine and it dies. You know what I mean? So usually what happens is companies and like pharmaceuticals, whatever, don't want to invest everything into it. You don't want to fund a phase 3 if it's going to fail at phase 1. So you would typically fund the phases very independently of one another. You would like do the phase, do all the data analysis, like make sure it works, take your time, then do your funding for the next phase, then recruit. And, so there's all this administrative stuff between the phases. So with the COVID vaccine trials, what happened was bets were hedged. So instead of running consecutive phases, they were run concurrently, with the caveat that if like the phase 1 group or phase 2 group fails, then the phase 3 group automatically fails.
Chop it out.
So you run all of them at once. So we actually gathered the same amount of data that we would do in a normal clinical trial in a much shorter time, hoping that the preceding phases would pass, and that then the work you were concurrently doing on the later phases would then be not thrown out. But also, in fact, because so many countries in the world were conducting these vaccine trials on the same products, with the same goal, we actually got an astounding amount of clinical trial data, because very rarely would you have a vaccine candidate being tested at the same time in so many different parts of the world, right? So the amount of people ask me, in COVID vaccine development, did we cut corners? Like, no, we actually expanded the amount of data that we would usually get. The only thing that we couldn't have was that like 2 years of follow-up or 3 years of follow-up. But because of the platform that was being used, especially with the mRNA technology, like there's a lot of, also, it's not new. I mean, mRNA technology has been around for 20 years. It's just that it was brought to popularity as a platform for the COVID-19 vaccines. But
what's a platform? What do you mean?
So a vaccine platform is a different kinds of vaccines. But I'll get into that now.
Yeah.
But
and also you said mRNA. Is that like it affects the DNA of the
so mRNA, so the
virus?
The central, all of molecular biology works on this like central dogma. And the central dogma of molecular biology is that you have DNA, and your DNA is the blueprint of everything that makes you you. And it encodes for all the proteins that make up your body, right? Because proteins are what gives your body structure and what enables all processes to run, right? Your carbohydrates and fats and, all other kinds of structural molecules, whatever, are all of everything that is not a protein in you is precipitated by a process that is run by a protein. So like without proteins, we are nothing, right? So that DNA is like the blueprint of you. It then gets transcribed and it sits inside a nucleus inside your cell, and nothing can get into that nucleus, right? So your DNA is really protected. But in order for the builders to build that protein, they need to be given building plans. So your DNA gets transcribed into messenger RNA, mRNA, and that then gets given to the other proteins in your cell that are structural proteins, and they build that protein according to that building plan that they've been given. So with an mRNA vaccine, what we did is we took the blueprint for the spike protein of the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and we basically, instead of giving your body the spike protein, we give your body the building instruction to make it. And then your cells will take up that mRNA and they'll treat it the same as they treat every other mRNA, which is, hey, we've got building plans, let's build this protein. It just so happened that the protein they were building wasn't a protein for you, it was a protein that is the SARS-CoV-2 spike protein that then gets released from the cell because the cellular machinery says, I've done my job, I've built the protein, here you go. And then your immune system says, hey, that's not part of me. Let me respond to it. And then you get the whole immune cascade where you develop immunity against that target. Because if we were to use, for example, a subunit vaccine, which is where I take a piece of my virus or bacteria and I physically, like I culture it and I grow it and I put it in a syringe and I give it to you, I can only give you so much, right? Whereas if I give you the building material, the instructions, and let your body make it, you can produce a whole lot more than what I could give you. You've got a much better chance of having a good, strong immune response to that target, right? Also, it makes production super easy because if we want to change the target, we just change the instruction we put inside the vaccine, right? So you have a plug and play vaccine platform that you can use for different targets. And then after 3 or 4 days, all of that mRNA is cleared. It doesn't stay in your body. It doesn't ever interact with your DNA. And that spike protein that's produced has been worked out and attacked by your immune system and studied. And after about a week, there is literally nothing left inside of you except that immune memory about what it was that you encountered.
I mean, the way you described how vaccines are developed and how it was tweaked for the COVID it like made so much sense to me. So clearly that research you did into communicating things has helped. I mean, you know what the sad thing about that story is? The one where you said you had to go and research it yourself, like how to communicate. I feel like that should be like one of the core
prerequisites
in any of these scientific fields. But so what do you think was causing like so much vaccine skepticism at the time? Was it because it came so fast? Or
I think the speed of production was definitely a factor because it's like people really held on to this idea that like it takes 5 to 10 years to make a vaccine and test a vaccine and whatever. And that is very true when you're working in a resource constrained setting and like potentially no one else really, is interested in the product. And like, you've maybe got one pharmaceutical company who's interested in developing it. And like, it may be very specific to a certain region, so in that case where you've got limited resources, then the less you can put in, the longer it's going to take you to achieve that process. But I think the other thing is just that like people are inherently afraid of what is unknown, and there's also like a risk perception bias where people are very happy to accept severe risks that we choose to take. So, for example, I know that when I get in my car and drive home, I know that I know the motor vehicle accident rates in this country. I know that I am taking a risk in driving home. I am choosing to take that risk. I accept taking that risk. People are a lot less comfortable with the same or even a much lesser risk that they feel they are not choosing. So if I say to you, you've got I'm pulling a number up. Let's say I say you've got a 1 in 10 chance of falling on your way out of this building, right? And you could get hurt. You say, well, I'll take that because I'll just make sure I don't fall. But if I say you've got a 1 in a million chance of having an allergic reaction to a vaccine that I'm going to give you, you're like, whoa, that's unacceptable. So there's that risk bias that scares people, and that gets,
and it's also the unknown, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
do you think
exactly.
it comes from fear of the unknown?
Yeah.
Like you don't understand it.
Yeah. So I mean, people were already scared of the virus because that was an unknown, and then you add this new vaccine, and like no one's ever, like, people have heard of like your flu shots and your MMR and that kind of thing, but like no one had ever heard of an MMR vaccine.
Yes.
Of an mRNA vaccine.
Yes.
They, like, it was new technology to the public, and like, why is it so quick? And how do we know it's going to be safe? And like, so there were unknowns from all sides, which I think just compounded the fear. And then you also had a lot of fear mongering.
Yeah.
Like
Anti-vax as well.
Yeah, but not even that. Like, you had fear mongering around the disease and the virus, and you had fear mongering around like, if the lockdowns continue, we're gonna run out of resources, and like there were so many things to be scared of that I think for a lot of people, it was easy to then direct that fear into something, and often that thing was the vaccine. But we know, like, COVID vaccinations and the rollout of COVID vaccines averted an estimated 54 million deaths. Like, they were highly effective at what they did. And the risks associated with COVID vaccination, like, for example, with the AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson viral vector vaccines, that you had about a 1 to 2 in 100,000 risk of the blood clotting. That vaccine-induced thrombocytopenia. Now we understand why that happened, but also it's a very low risk. And with the mRNA vaccines, like the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, there was that risk of myocarditis in young men. That was about a 10 in 100,000 risk. Both of those things, blood clotting and myocarditis, you had about a 20-fold higher risk of that happening with natural SARS-CoV-2 infection. So, like, every single pharmaceutical product in the world, like, if you've ever read the package insert on a Panado, like, they list some pretty severe adverse events that can happen. And there will always be someone who will react adversely to a pharmaceutical intervention, right? We have an acceptable risk rate in medicine. If the risk is low and the benefit is so huge, it's acceptable. And as long as, like, you are aware of it and, like, you can manage it, which we always do, and because of our surveillance systems and our pharmacovigilance, like, we detect these adverse events so quickly, no matter how rare they may be.
But the funny thing is, it's not only in medicine, like, it's in day-to-day life. Like, as you said, you get in the car, there is a risk that you'll die, but you drive there anyway.
Yeah, but, like, there's a risk that your brakes could have a mechanical failure and you won't be able to stop. Or, like, there's a risk that there may be a natural disaster, or there's a, you know what I mean? Like, everything, there's inherent risk in being alive.
Yes. Every day. Yeah.
And it's just that perception of, like, whether we feel in control of that risk or not. And, like, a lot of people are scared that with pharmaceutical interventions, we are not in control of that risk, but we actually really are, because we understand the risk, the relative risk. We understand how to identify it. We understand how to treat it. And the relatively speaking, the chances of that risk actually being a concern is super low. You know what I mean? So we are actually in control over that situation a lot more than people think we are.
So speaking of surveillance, I'm sure you've heard of this Nipah virus thing that's coming out of India.
What's that?
Nipah virus.
I will preface, not my area of specialty. So
okay. All right. We asked Prof. Glenda Gray about it. You know of her, right?
Yes, of course.
And
she's a legend.
My straight up question to her was like, shouldn't we be concerned about this? And she was like, yes. So my question here is, if you have heard about it, like, you guys have to stay abreast of whatever it is that's coming out in the world, being through your surveillance programs, to identify that if something could be a pandemic or not. What's your response to it? Like, do you have, people that instruct you now to, like, redirect resources?
So I think this is variable depending on where in the whole vaccinology world you sit. So I'm not involved in vaccine development at all. So I keep abreast of these kind of things out of interest, but there are people who keep abreast of these things because they are
job.
vaccine developers. They need to understand, firstly, with vaccines that we already have, could we be making them better? Or with all of these emerging diseases, does it get to a point where it warrants a vaccine, or do we need to start thinking about a vaccine? That kind of thing. So there are a lot of factors that go into it. The first is how, when you hear of a new pathogen, like, you ask a couple of questions that are not in any order of significance. They're all significant, but like, how infectious is it? How clinically severe is it? Is it something like swine flu that's got a pretty high case fatality ratio? Or is it something that's like pretty benign, that you may get sick, but you're unlikely to die?
Mortality rates.
Is it like, what's the basic reproductive number? So how infectious is it? Like, is one person going to pass it on to 3 people, 5 people, 10 people? How quickly could it spread? And then where is it? Who is it happening? What is it happening in a very specific population? Is it like, was it a zoonotic virus, or was it an animal virus that's crossed barriers? Could that happen anywhere else? Is that animal a carrier somewhere else? If it is, then are we seeing it there as well, for example? And all of these come into play about whether or not there is a level of urgency and severity that, like, you need to start vaccine development. But after COVID, there is a new kind of approach to it, where we have the idea of like 100-day mission, right? And the idea is that we proved how quickly we can respond to things with COVID, and we unite. So now with 100-day missions, we want to have within 100 days of new pathogen detection, we want to try have a therapeutic, a diagnostic, and a preventative measure.
Is this an organization?
No, this is like an approach to public health systems thinking. It's like spearheaded by, for example, like
WHO.
and like big public health institutions and like research centers that do this kind of work. But it's an approach to these problems, and it's a highly ambitious thing to say, well, within 100 days, I want to have a diagnostic, a therapeutic, and a preventative measure. But that thinking is like, drives you to really pursue these questions with intensity.
Don't just sit on your laurels.
Yeah, because the problem is like, there are, unfortunately, we want to ideally like think about public health issues as just public health issues, like the primary driver of vaccine development should be burden of disease. But there are other things that factor in, for example, like if it is a super, super rare disease that is happening in a very small population in a very isolated part of the world, it may not be financially or economically viable.
It's all about money, right?
Yeah, at the end of the day, So like, if you look at, there are some infectious diseases that were neglected for a long time, but then when they started threatening certain populations or certain countries, and suddenly there was interest in developing pharmaceutical interventions.
When it affects your workforce, then suddenly the companies
are exactly. And like, we have this whole category of what we call orphaned diseases, and they're diseases that are just so rare, it's not worth it for pharmaceuticals to develop interventions for them.
Tropical neglected diseases.
Yeah, exactly. Another big one. Like right now in Ethiopia, there's an outbreak of Marburg virus, which is a terrible hemorrhagic fever with a super high mortality rate. But you're not hearing about that in the news.
Yeah. So tell us. So the masters was 2 years. Any other interesting stories there, or what happens after masters? Like,
so
in a scientist's world.
The idea with that vaccinology masters is to produce people who are then going to go and work in the field of vaccinology in some capacity. So a lot of the people who come into that masters are people who have public health experience, or who are medical doctors or whatever, who want to expand into this field.
So there were medical doctors in your
group so I think of the 7 of us, I think four of us were medical doctors, I think.
Yeah.
and then there were three of us were scientists.
Okay.
And it's really cool because I now teach a genetics component of that vaccinology degree. So I get to then see every year, I see the new class of vaccinology master's students, which is, it's always interesting to see the proportions of like medical doctor. But the other, I think the last year, the year before, we had someone who was a bioethics regulatory person, like from a pretty legal background, coming in to specialize in this kind of thing, which is awesome.
Wow.
But the idea is that then you would go from there into industry or into some sort of working capacity around vaccinology, so either vaccine development or testing or implementation, rollouts, regulatory, that kind of thing. I knew that I wanted to do a PhD because I loved the process of this process of diving into something and researching it and learning it, and the idea. I think there's a bit of, if I'm being entirely honest, there was a bit of an ego involved, because when you have a PhD, you're contributing novel research to something. So you are regarded as a global expert in that field, and that you've answered a question that hasn't been answered before.
Ego is so important.
And I think
it's got a bad reputation, but
it
it's
does.
important.
But it definitely drove me to want that prestige of a PhD
and being the best scientist that you could have been.
Exactly, being the best bricklayer I could be, right?
Ego needs a good PR person.
I think when it clouds your judgment of what you can or can't do, or what you do or don't know, that's when it becomes an issue. But you need to have ambition. So I after my master's pretty heavily pursued PhD opportunities. I was really interested in my master's research was similar to my honors. It was vaccine response related to genetic mutations, but for measles vaccines this time. And I really became interested with measles. And measles is, people kind of neglect it a little bit because they're like, it's nothing. It's an incredibly severe pathogen. It's got huge public health significance. And because of the dropping in the vaccine coverage globally, we're seeing measles making a comeback. Like I said, all those countries had lost their measles elimination status. So I really wanted to have a measles research component in my PhD, and I approached. There's a very, very closely working with Alive is a research unit called Wits, which is the Wits Vaccines and Infectious Diseases Analytics Research Unit, which is run by Professor Shabir Mahdi, who's the Dean of the Health Sciences Faculty at Wits, and also the co-director of Alive. So we had exposure to Prof. Mahdi during our masters, and and he is a legend in vaccinology.
He became a household name, right, during the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, but even his work in pneumococcal conjugate vaccines and
that's in the industry,
no.
Right?
So I'm saying, but there's no question that he is an amazingly prominent vaccinologist, and with Alive and Vida being so closely related, I then kind of really I targeted wanting to get into Vida to pursue my PhD. So I managed to get introduced to some people, and then it turned out that there was this clinical trial that had been run where they needed immunology work done, and all the samples had been collected, but that they were there, but the work hadn't been done. So I took that on as the backbone of my PhD. And then I kind of added some measles work, and then added a rubella component, and my PhD is now looking at 3 different pathogens. So I got Streptococcus pneumoniae, and looking at how we can optimize the way that we use pneumococcal conjugate vaccines. Which, Streptococcus pneumoniae is the leading cause of vaccine preventable death in children under 5 years old in the world. It's incredibly, it's the most common cause of bacteria-induced pneumonia. And then I've got this really cool measles thing where I'm also looking at measles vaccine schedule optimization in terms of timing of doses and long-term immune effect, and whether or not how we're using measles vaccines is developing long-term protection as well as it could be. And then my last sort of research objective is looking at rubella, because South Africa's only just introduced a rubella vaccine in our public program. We never had it before.
Okay.
And rubella can be really, really significant if pregnant women get it, because it can infect the fetus and lead to really severe congenital deformities, this thing called congenital rubella syndrome. And so I wanted to see, prior to our introduction of a rubella vaccine, what are our natural rubella immunity rates looking like in different parts of our populations. So I kind of combined all of this into a PhD that is all centered on using immunological evidence and antibody data to optimize vaccine schedules and how we use them.
But that sounds like a lot.
It is a lot.
Isn't like PhDs, it's like very like focused and niche and like a really tiny thing. You seem to have gotten a whole lot of stuff involved.
So it's the questions themselves are niche, but their applications are broad, which is really cool. And I think what I'm really passionate about in the long run is vaccine policy and strategy. And I think that I think that there is at the interface between evidence and policy, you can see that sometimes there's a breakdown where policy decisions are made that may not reflect what is actually being shown in the evidence or in the literature. And I mean, what's happening around the world right now in certain countries is reflective of public health policy not following the trend of evidence.
It's just thumb sucking or whatever.
And or like, for whatever ideological reason or whatever. But I'm really passionate about using evidence, generating evidence, like I've done in my PhD, that has a direct policy implication. Where we can say, like, look, this is what we're seeing. This is how this is working. This is a recommendation about how we could maybe use this vaccine better, or this is how we could do something better. And I really want to, over my career, I want to add a strong voice to that evidence to policy pipeline and help decision makers be guided by evidence.
Yes, and the decision makers need people who can explain it to them so they understand it. Right?
Exactly.
Because I made that throwaway comment about thumb sucking, and you said, well, ideologies. And I think you're right, but it all depends on who's passing on that information to the decision maker.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So how are you going to make money? Like, serious? Are you making? Do they pay you for that?
I get I won a scholarship from the South African Medical Research Council.
Yeah.
So I get a stipend. I think it's no secret that being a PhD student is not gonna, it's not the most lucrative endeavor. I see it a lot with like people who've worked and then come back to study struggle with that like financial sacrifice that it is. Whereas I've never worked. I just did degree after degree after degree. I've been at university for 13 years.
Yeah, I feel like I'm asking this question on behalf of David Kapelus.
Yeah, so
he's going to be listening.
So I'm used to not making a lot of money because I've never made money. But in the long run, there are you can go into like pure public health where you're working like with government sort of entities. Or you can go the sort of NGO route where you're working with like sort of things like the Gates Foundation, or like there's a bunch of these kind of like the Wellcome Trust, or like these kind of funding organizations that are really interested in like steering research into a way that it's going to be useful in real world interventions, that kind of thing. Or you can go the kind of like big global like WHO, UN pathway, or you can go into consulting.
What's that?
So like you work for consulting firms where you then you assist with like evidence grading and you with implementation strategy, or with market access work or that kind of thing. Like a lot of it is also about, how do we ensure like equitable vaccine access, that kind of thing. So you get these boutique specialized consulting firms that are private entities, private corporations, but that their work is focused on a public health interest, and they then work with things like the WHO or governments or ministries of health or that kind of thing. So like, or you can go into pharmaceuticals.
I was going to ask, big pharma?
So you can work directly for a pharmaceutical in research or vaccine development, or being like a market access person, or that kind of thing.
Which one pays the most out of all those options?
I think probably being in pharma pays the most. I'm guessing here because I mean,
you haven't really looked into it that much.
So I have, but I mean, I've also the other option that's available to me that also makes a lot of sense is to do a postdoc, where I kind of stay in research.
How many more
David's
years?
getting nervous.
So there are a lot of options that are available.
So that's going to happen probably.
Well, I'm keeping my options very open.
Yeah.
I
mean, there's like 3 months left. Don't you have to
so
start making
I'm going to
decisions
submit
soon?
my PhD thesis in like end of April, we're aiming for by the end of May it's submitted.
We're recording on the 1st of March for people watching because we release later.
Yeah. So today is the 1st of March. We're hoping that by the end of May it's sealed, submitted, sent off.
That's when you start applying.
So I'm starting to think about my options now because I need, I don't want to sit with a big gap between finishing the PhD and therefore like not having funding, and getting a job because, I want to live and, I've got, my own ambitions about,
Jiu-jitsu
family
and MMA.
stuff and all, that kind of thing. So I would really, I want to make sure that I'm starting my career. Also, I'm 30 years old now. I've been studying for a long time. Like I want to have a big person job and earn big person money and this thing expendable income, like that's a totally foreign concept to me right now, so I'd like to have some of that.
Don't worry.
Your lighties will learn.
So I'm putting out feelers now about options and things to do, and then hopefully the idea is that it'll line up such that I submit the PhD and then can start whatever I want to start. But I'm right now I'm not putting all my I'm putting my fingers in as many pies as possible to see what is going to be the best thing for me.
So what are your hobbies like?
My hobbies, so in the limited free time that I have, I do Brazilian jiu-jitsu and judo. And
what got you into that?
So it's quite funny. I was always like a bit of a bigger kid. And I have always been like active, but I was never fit and I was never in good shape. And I think with that, comes, confidence issues and all that kind of thing. So like I've wanted to get in good shape. And I, at one stage I got like really into like powerlifting and gym. And then I kind of like justified my size because I was like, well, weight moves weight. And, it doesn't matter that I'm 115 kilos because it means I can bench heavy, which I was just, conning myself a little bit. And then in 2020, it was the end of 2020 when we were out of our lockdowns and everything like that. And I'd moved out of home into an apartment building, and there was a guy who lived in the apartment building as well. And it turns out that he had gone to the same high school as me, and his younger sister was my matric when I was in grade 8. So like I knew of him, and I was a big MMA fan, so I knew what grappling was. And our parking bays in the garage were right next to each other. And we got home at the same time one day, and I saw he was wearing his jiu-jitsu gi, and I recognized the logo on his pants because it was like a big international franchise of these jiu-jitsu gyms. So I said, "Oh, do you do jiu-jitsu?" And he said, "Not only do I do jiu-jitsu, I own a gym down the road, like literally down the road, because the flat was at the top of Cornet Drive and the gym's at the bottom of Cornet Drive." And he said, "Come try it out." And at this stage, I was 116 kilos. I couldn't tie my shoes without, having to hold my breath. I couldn't walk upstairs. I was not feeling great about it. And this offered a new way to be active. It was also really like it offered some social interaction after a year of a lot of social, isolation. And I'm a very extroverted person, so I was craving something. It's also jiu-jitsu is an amazing martial art because it's like very cerebral. Like we call it human chess because they're like, it's not about violence and hurting someone or whatever. It's like it's puzzles and it's problem solving and it's how do I implement what I want to do and how do I present problems to my opponent faster than they can present problems to me? How do I solve their problems faster than they can solve my problems? You know, and I went for my trial week, and I just fell in love with it, and it kind of started this whole martial arts journey for me. Like I started boxing, I started judo, and I mean now, almost 6 years later, well, 5.5 years later, I'm now 82 kilos. I'm in great shape. I can go and do a 15-kilometer run.
Yeah, man. I mean, look, I follow you on social media.
Yeah.
And when you were telling the story about that you couldn't tie your shoelace and that you were out of breath climbing whatever,
Yeah.
I'm surprised because I've only followed you, recently, and
Yes.
you're the opposite of that. You know, you strike me as like a fitness freak type.
Well, I mean, now I am, and it's also like such an important thing for my mental health. If I am injured or I can't be active, I really suffer with not having an outlet for stress and that like extra energy and that kind of thing. And also the thing that's beautiful about like in the gym, it's very like I've learned how to train really hard in the gym. So I've learned how to train myself in a gym to the point that it becomes a singular activity that my mind can't drift. But a lot of people find that like they say, oh, gym is like too boring or repetitive and my mind drifts. And like I kind of always say, well, you're not training hard enough.
Yeah.
But the nice thing about something like I also like I rock climb and that kind of thing. And the nice thing about those activities is like if you're on a wall or if you're in a fight, you can't afford to be thinking about anything else, because then you will lose. Like if I'm in a boxing ring and I'm not focusing, I'm going to get punched in the face.
Yeah, but just avoid walls and avoid fights.
Yeah, exactly. So,
well, I like how you explain what jiu-jitsu is, like the scientific version.
Yeah.
You're trying to disprove someone else's problem that they're presenting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it's when you've got like a PhD is so all consuming, like I'm always thinking about my work, and like I keep a notebook next to my bed so that if I wake up at 3 a.m, I can write an idea down or something. So having an activity that can be so single-minded, it becomes meditative, and it's genuinely an escape from everything else. Like when you're on that jiu-jitsu mat, nothing else off that mat exists. And like that mat becomes whatever you need it to be. It's your therapy space, it's your social space, it can be church, it can be whatever you need it to be. And the group of like the camaraderie that you make with people, and like it's, we have men, women, boys, girls, we've got every culture,
Little kids,
every
my daughter
religion,
knows that.
every kind of person comes together, and we do jiu-jitsu or judo or whatever, and you are united by this camaraderie. And like the friendship you form with someone when you have physically fought them, it's like a very special kind of bond,
So you reckon I should keep my daughter at it because she's telling me I don't want to do judo, and I'm like, no, we need to carry on.
It is the most incredible thing, and there are actually like there are actual studies that have shown that kids who do particularly judo, jiu-jitsu, or wrestling develop much higher levels of emotional regulation, discipline, social interactions. They do better at school, but also like fundamentally, they can defend themselves. They can, like that's an important skill.
But the first part that you mentioned is the part that attracts me to it for my daughter. And the person who recommended that she do judo is my colleague from the UK, who's a psychiatrist, and he said all these things that you're telling me. So I'll just keep her at it.
The other thing that's amazing about it is neurodivergent people, like especially people who are on the autism spectrum, respond amazingly well. And this is a generalization, obviously, but like we've seen it at our gym where like people who really struggle start grappling, and the way that it builds identity and confidence and like brings people out of their shells and like overcomes obstacles of like social anxiety and that kind of thing. Like it's such a powerful tool. And jiu-jitsu is like, there's a big joke in the jiu-jitsu community. Like we joke that we're all a bit autistic to like want to do jiu-jitsu. And it's something that you can become so obsessive over. Like my Instagram feed is literally like science feeds and like grappling highlights.
The algorithm.
Like my algorithm has got me like to a T. It's just like, hey, here's a meme about how much PhDs are soul destroying, but also look at this guy get choked out. So it's really attractive for neurodivergent people in channeling that like, that intensive focus of or obsession about something into something that's productive.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned you're an extrovert. Were you always that way, or even from lighty days?
When I was 3 years old,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like this is like sums me up in a nutshell. We have a very good. There's an Italian restaurant called Mastro Antonio in Ilovo, and we're very good friends with the restaurateur who owns it. And we would. It's about as old as I am. So I mean, like I've literally been going there my entire life, and I would see Paolo, the owner, going around to all the tables and talking to people, right? So I just like assumed that this was something that one did in a restaurant. So I was like 3 years old, and we would go to Mastro Antonio, and I would say to my dad, I want a pear juice or whatever, and then I would hop off my chair and literally go to everyone in the restaurant and go, is everything to your liking? How is your food? And it's like,
out of interest, how did your parents react to that? Do they let you do it?
Yeah, I think also
because
it was a different time.
But I feel like
I
feel like parents are important in either like bringing out the extrovert in you or like shutting it down.
Yeah, no, my parents were very.
And you've got your mom's Italian, isn't she?
Yes, yeah.
Well, until you get kidnapped, and then they were like, "Oh, maybe
like I said, I mean, I think
it
it was a different time in the 90s. You know, maybe it was.
But you went to Tokyo, right? And you said like 3-year-olds just walking around the streets there in town. It's different.
It's an amazing thing.
Is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to like put out there? Please do.
I think there are two really important parts of vaccines that I would really like, 2 points I'd really like to make. And they're very topical and everything, because there's so much hype about vaccines right now. We see what's going on in the States and that kind of thing. And I think I could spend hours. The first thing is I could spend hours going into the core biology and the science of like fundamentally why vaccines are some of the safest pharmaceutical products that exist, and why these scary, severe adverse events that people attribute to vaccines are just not happening at the rate that people claim they're happening. And like these whole vaccines cause autism stuff and all that kind of thing. And we could go super mechanistic, but let's just boil it down to a game of numbers, right? So globally, in routine immunization, like the doses you give you would give routinely, so your infants, your children, flu shots, whatever, we conservatively give 1.5 to 2 billion vaccine doses around the world every year, routinely. And then when you add outbreak response and catch-up campaigns and supplementary immunization activities and extra rollouts and all these things, those add a good few billion more doses every year. I mean, like COVID, for example, it gave out over 14 billion doses of COVID vaccine over like a 3-year period, right? Like,
wow.
And that's in addition to all your routine vaccines that were happening anyway. So let's like absolutely conservatively lowball it at we give 4 billion doses of vaccines every year around the world, right?
Yeah.
If there was a genuinely high risk rate of an adverse event happening, you wouldn't even need surveillance systems. It would be so apparent. Our like hospitals would be overwhelmed. Like we would have like constant public health crises of people suffering, even if it's a 1 in 10,000 incidence rate. If you're giving 4 billion doses, that's 400,000 adverse events. You can't hide that, right? So the fact that we're not seeing that, and the fact that we can give so many billions of vaccine doses with almost nothing happening, kind of just from a logic perspective shows the safety profile of these products. I mean, when like the number, for example, the myocarditis incidence of like 10 per 100,000 is super low. But if I immunize 4 billion people in a very short space of time, then those like 40,000 cases are going to look like a lot happening right now. But in terms of relative risk, it's still 10 in 100,000 or, whatever it is. So the other numbers that are really involved with vaccines that are so important to understand is the return of investment on vaccines, right? So
Sorry, wait, before you carry on there, if I can play devil's advocate and ask, like, what's the point? the point I think for vaccinations and what is it that you do is like to ensure the continuity of mankind.
Yeah.
I'm assuming, right? But how do we know you are saying what you are, but it's based on like short-term studies. How do we know what the long-term studies are going to show?
I mean, it's also like for something like a COVID vaccine, for example, right? We now have 5 years of data to go on, right? But with other vaccines like MMR, for example,
Is that long?
I mean, that's been around since the 60s.
Hmm.
You know, like there are vaccines that we've got. There may be new products, but they're improvements on older vaccines. You know, so we've been vaccinating with what we recognize as vaccines for over 100 years, right? We have an extremely long data period to show that the mechanisms through which vaccines work do not ordinarily lend themselves to long-term adverse events, right? So when you look at something like when we look at the biological plausibility of this product causing a long-term effect, vaccines really don't fit into that unless you've got immune dysregulation, autoimmunity, or something like allergy to a vaccine ingredient, that kind of thing, whatever. But in healthy people with functioning immune systems, which almost all of us are, vaccines just don't work in a way that lends itself to this long-term effect. Also, there's nothing in the vaccine that stays in your body for a long time. You know what I mean? Whereas, like, if you're taking chronic, high-scheduled medication that you're taking daily for years, whatever, like that's way more likely to give you a long-term effect, side effect than a vaccine is.
Yeah.
But we have an overwhelming amount of data to go on. Like, for example, like the link between vaccines and autism, right? The claimed link. There are a handful of studies that are like methodologically flawed and statistically flawed and use very small sample sizes that have claimed that there is a possible link between vaccines and autism. We also know that we now know that autism is a multifactorial problem. It's incredibly complex. It's a very wide spectrum of symptoms and severity, and there's no single cause that can precipitate all like autism happening. But we have 2 decades of evidence, right? Since the first claim that MMR was linked to autism was made, scientists have been actively, because an important part of science is replication, right? If I can't replicate what you've done, and if no one can replicate what you've done, then maybe you didn't do it right? Or maybe what you're saying is not true. And we also know that in that first study that person has admitted to it was fraudulent. You know? But there have been 2 decades of studies cumulatively covering over 1 million children over many years that have shown that there is no correlation between exposure to vaccines, timing of vaccines, number of vaccines, and incidence of autism, right? So when we link back to what we were saying at the beginning, where the whole point of the scientific method is to say, well, beyond a reasonable doubt, all the converging evidence points to this being the case, we have an overwhelming amount of converging evidence that shows no association between vaccines and autism, right? And the numbers back it up, right? So I find when you boil it down to a numbers game, like it helps people understand it I find when you try and like explain from a biological perspective why it's not a thing, you lose people. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Yash is 100% right. I feel like you guys need a whole PR team because the fact that you are trying to explain this to us, it's so bizarre. I mean, you're a scientist. This is all facts. Like the only other person that should be arguing with you is another scientist.
Guys, storytelling is so underrated.
Yeah.
It's so underrated.
But the other thing that I was going to say is the return of investment on vaccines is amazing, right? So there's 2 ways we can look at it. The most basic way is savings in terms of cost of care. So if you don't get a vaccine and then you get sick and then we have to care for you, that incurs costs, right? Yeah. So for every $1 that you invest into vaccinations, you get about $20 saving in terms of cost of care, right? Because you're preventing incidence of disease. But then if you take into account like total like statistical value of life, so that's like now because the majority of vaccine preventable diseases were causing mortality in children under the age of 5, right?
Okay.
So you're having huge mortality rates in children that then obviously are never getting to grow up, join the workforce, contribute to the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And through vaccinations, right, between 1974 and 1920 and 2024, so over that 50-year span, it's estimated that routine immunization averted 154 million deaths in children under the age of 5.
Wow.
That's 154 million kids who grew up to get jobs, to spend money, to make money, and then you get an ROI of about 1 to 54. So every $1 billion that your country wants to invest into vaccines, you're going to get $54 billion of economic stimulus from that. So they are an incredibly powerful economic tool, which is why like cutting vaccine resources or funding towards vaccines makes no sense economically, because like you get this short-term stimulus of diverting funding, but you lose all of this long-term growth from having kids grow up and be healthy and being able to like join your workforce. And it kind of also like feeds into the other point that I want to make, which is why different countries have different vaccination schedules. Because like now there's all this talk about like the US wants to adopt Denmark's vaccination schedule. And like there are a couple of reasons why this is not feasible. The first one, which is the biological stuff, is different countries have got different burdens of disease. And that can mean that different countries have completely different diseases. Like for example, yellow fever is not endemic in South Africa. We don't need routine yellow fever vaccination, right? TB is not really a big problem in Europe. So they don't give the BCG vaccine at birth, which is used for TB, whereas we all do in sub-Saharan Africa and in a lot of low and middle income countries, right? And then it could also be that, the disease happens in both countries, but to very different severities. So it may be a huge problem here that we need to vaccinate against it. It may be like very low incidence, very low burden, very easy to control somewhere else. They don't need to vaccinate. And then you get all the economic stuff, like maybe that country has got such strong healthcare infrastructure that they've decided that this disease is something that they can easily treat. Whereas another country maybe can't, and therefore vaccination is a much better way of them preventing it. So, or, one country may have more sophisticated infrastructure and can handle more vaccines because they've got better cold chain management, whereas another country may struggle, so they need to really prioritize the most important vaccines, that sort of thing. So it's such a delicate balance. But that means that over decades and decades of stringent epidemiological data and immunological data and pharmaceutical data, your country's vaccine schedule has been fine-tuned to be specific to your population, right?
Makes so much
sense. So when you try and swap it out for another country that is so like epidemiologically different to yours,
can't just copy paste.
Exactly. You then may be risking opening yourself up to massive incidences of disease that you had controlled because now you're cutting those vaccines out, right? So it's just really important to like understand that vaccines all over the world are working towards the same goal of preserving life, preserving health, and making sure that children don't have to suffer, right? From a health perspective with infectious disease. But that goal looks different in different parts of the world. So you can't just blanket approach vaccinology. It's got to be tailored.
You've dumbed it down so well that even I get this, right? I'm glad, and it's just got me thinking as you're telling that. I mean, do you not have plans to maybe one day like spread the word on social media or something, like different platforms type of thing?
I would love to, and I actually been for a long time I've been thinking about maybe starting a YouTube channel, because there's a lot of amazing scientists who have become like influencers who put out amazing material, who try and educate people and communicate in a really effective way. And I would love to. It's really just a matter of time. And I'm hoping that after the PhD, which is, I'll have a bit more time to play with that sort of thing.
Played with TikTok?
I haven't.
You must.
I've resisted the urge.
I've been scared of TikTok, right?
Yeah.
I only started TikTok because of the podcast. And being on TikTok for the podcast, obviously I'm going to be doom scrolling every now and then, right? I get sucked in. And you've heard of Charlie Puth, the musician. He's like a nerd when it comes to music.
Yes, he's amazing. Yeah.
And he's brilliant. And I find myself like following him and now I'm like into music.
Yeah.
So I'm telling you.
Yeah, I would love to be the reason that if I can inspire one person out of 1,000 to pursue this, to pursue medical science, pursue vaccinology, it would be incredible. But more importantly, if I can help someone, an individual, a parent who may be sitting on the fence about whether to vaccinate themselves or their child, if I can just be a constructive voice that helps them make an informed decision, whatever that decision may be, but an informed one, then I would be really proud.
Yeah.
So thank you for this opportunity, guys.
I followed you now.
Amazing.
You go to
Thank
one
you.
more.
Yeah, you'll be doing, everyone a service. So I think about it carefully and do it, man. But thank you so much, dude. It's been fascinating.
Yeah, thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
This has been awesome.
Yeah,
thank
thanks,
you.
Dan. We'll hope this will go viral.
This is going to be probably published in maybe all the way up to May now. So
Okay.
by the time it's published, we might have to change the title to Dr. Danny.
Yeah.
Sweet, man.
You can
Thanks so
add a
much.
little postscript.
No, it's not going to add.
Yeah.
It's too much effort. Thanks a lot, man.
That was
Sure.
an awesome conversation.
Yeah, thanks,
guys.
man.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Let me press stop here.